Hello, my name is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, a weekly Torah portion podcast where we read the weekly Torah portion and I provide my personal interpretation of the text. As always, I'd like to remind everyone that I am not a Torah scholar professionally, just somebody who wanted to study Torah. This week's Torah portion is for Parashat Vayeitzei for the 12th of Kislev, 5784, the 25th of November, 2023. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the material. For those who wish to follow along with the text, you could find the translation on Chabad.org. First portion, Genesis chapter 28, verse 10. And Jacob left Beersheba, and he went to Haran. And he arrived at the place and lodged there because the sun had set. And he took some of the stones of the place and placed them at his head, and he lay down in that place. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven, and behold, angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord was standing over him. And he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land upon which you are lying to you, I will give it, and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and you shall gain strength westward and eastward and northward and southward. And through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth, and through your seed. And behold, I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will restore you to this land, for I will not forsake you until I have done what I have spoken concerning you. And Jacob awakened from his sleep, and he said, Indeed, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was frightened, and he said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob arose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had placed at his head, and he set it up as a monument, and he poured oil on top of it. And he named the place Beth-El, but Luz was originally the name of the city. And Jacob uttered a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and he will guard me on this way upon which I am going, and he will give me bread to eat and a garment to wear, and if I return in peace to my father's house, and the Lord will be my God, then this stone which I have placed as a monument shall be a house of God, and everything that you give me, I will surely tithe to you. All right. So, getting right into it, this is the story of Jacob making his trip over to see his uncle's house as he fled after taking the blessing from Isaac. So, first and foremost, he doesn't know that he is now in a very holy spiritual place, and so when he goes to sleep, he suddenly has a dream that reveals to him the true nature of the environment. So, behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven. So I do want to bring attention to this particular line. First off, people may have heard the phrase Jacob's ladder before. That is referring to this. But also significant is the fact that it mentions a ladder set up on the ground, its top reached to heaven. Now, way back when, in the portion of Genesis chapter 11 or so, they talk about building a tower to the heavens as well. The men on earth are trying to do the same thing. So, I do think it's significant that in this dream state, Jacob is able to see a physical manifestation of the ladder ascending from the ground all the way to the heavenly skies, or to heaven itself, and the idea of something being able to reach heaven while touching down on the earth. And also, I guess this is sort of the commuter traffic of angels, right? So those that are serving God, they basically get in and out through this ladder to the gate of heaven. So, in this moment, we also get the confirmation that he has received the blessing. Isaac blessed him, and essentially, the blessing itself is sort of like a spiritual presence or a status effect in video game terms. Something that is inhabiting the person or about the person's self. And so it went from Abraham to Isaac, and now Isaac has passed this spiritual power on to his son Jacob. And the Lord acknowledges basically, yes, you've received this because here I am speaking to you in your dream. And so this significance is also that we have confirmation that the blessing has taken effect immediately. Additionally, he reaffirms the same blessing, the same covenant about the land and returning to the land, and of course, the fruitful generations, your seed shall be dust of the earth, etc., etc. So, keeping up with the promise made to the fathers, And then, of course, also, this entire experience just leaves Jacob in awe, in fear. It is important to note the word fear, and he was frightened because, again, it's not enough to love God, but also to fear God. This sense of power and almighty presence is terrifying in a way. It's a reverence for the true power of this divine being. So, consecrating it with the name Beth-El, which means house of El, and we've talked about that before, El being another name for the Lord, so house of El, Beth-El, but Luz was originally the name of the city. I think this is significant just to give some context for the location for those who might be curious, and also basically Jacob affirms everything that's been done here and says, hey, if all comes to be as you say, I am going to give a portion of what is mine, what is given to me, to you. I will tithe to you. So he builds a monument to consecrate and commemorate the location and honor the Lord, and also makes a vow to basically give in exchange all the things that you give to me, I will give some of it back to you. Very significant because the concept of sacrifice and things like that will be very much recurring throughout the generations. Let's go ahead and move on to the second portion. Genesis chapter 29, verse 1, second portion. Now Jacob lifted his feet and went to the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it, because from that well they would water the flocks, and a huge rock was upon the mouth of the well. And all the flocks would gather there, and they would roll the rock off the mouth of the well, and water the sheep, and then they would return the rock unto the mouth of the well to its place. And Jacob said to them, My brothers, where are you from? And they said, We are from Haran. And he said to them, Do you know Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said to them, Are things going well with him? And they said, Things are going well, and behold, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. And he said, The day is yet long, it is not the time to take in the livestock. Water the sheep, and go, pasture. And they said, We cannot do that until all the flocks are gathered together, and they will roll the rock off the mouth of the well, and we shall then water the sheep. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob drew near and rolled the rock off the mouth of the well, and he watered the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and he raised his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. Now it came to pass, when Laban heard the report of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran towards him, and he embraced him, and he kissed him, and he brought him into his house. He told Laban all these happenings. And Laban said to him, Indeed, you are my bone and my flesh. And so he stayed with him a full month. And Laban said to Jacob, Because you are my kinsman, should you work for me gratis? Tell me what your wages shall be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were tender, but Rachel had beautiful features and a beautiful complexion. So here we go at the end of the second portion. So what happens here? He continues his journey, and he comes across a well where there are shepherds handling the flocks, and basically he has a little bit of a conversation and finds out about his uncle, and also learns that not only is his uncle doing well, but also his cousin Rachel is coming over to take care of the sheep. And so while he's chatting with them, he suggests to the men, The day is yet long, it is not the time to take in the livestock, water the sheep and go, pasture. But they can't do that yet. So the question is, why would he tell these men to do that? And I think it's possible that he was trying to secure a private audience with Rachel, so as not to let this be a public matter. Or maybe he's just trying to be helpful in some way. So either way, they say we can't do that, and explains how the watering is going to go down. So this entire thing could also just be a matter of gathering intelligence about what goes on here, the local customs, learning about how things are different. So while he's still talking with them, Rachel shows up. So it could almost be perceived that maybe he was stalling for time, even. Whatever the case is, he's coming to make sure that this is Rachel. And when it came to pass, Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban. Jacob drew near and rolled the rock off the mouth of the well. So he drew the water for these sheep. And he kissed Rachel, raised his voice, and wept. So I don't think this means that it was a romantic sort of scene where he's kissing her in inappropriate ways. Maybe he kissed her hand, or maybe he's kissing her on the cheek, because it says also when Laban comes to see him, he kisses him. So it's this affection in any case, or acknowledgement, or this greeting. It's very significant, and this is family. This is family, and the fact that he is raising his voice and weeping, it almost seems like he's just completely lost control of himself emotionally. He's overwhelmed, and think about it from this perspective. One, he's all alone. His family is way back home. He's out here by himself, and now here he is face to face with his kinsman, and he can't help but be moved. And we hear also that she's very beautiful later on, so it's significant in many ways. But in any case, Laban comes to him just absolutely with the same sort of reciprocated affection and excitement, and then we get into him staying with him for a month. And Laban says to Jacob, "Because you're my kinsman, should you work for me gratis? Tell me what your wages should be." So, essentially, this is a very indirect way of saying, okay, you've been my guest for a while, now let's put you to work. How much should I pay you? So this is him no longer being a guest. This is, let's transition this to a formal business transaction. And, you're not going to be working for me for free, but, again, this is really just him laying down that he knows that there's going to be some sort of transaction here. And we hear about his two daughters, and now we'll move into the third portion. Chapter 29, verse 18. And Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will work for you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me." So Jacob worked for Rachel 7 years, but they appeared to him like a few days because of his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are completed that I may come to her." So Laban gathered all the people of the place, and he made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that Laban took his daughter Leah, and he brought her to him, and he came to her. And Laban gave Zilpah his maidservant to his daughter Leah as a maidservant. And it came to pass in the morning, and behold, she was Leah. So he said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Did I not work with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It is not done so in our place to give the younger one before the firstborn. Complete the wedding week of this one, and we will give you this one too for the work that you will render me for another 7 years. And Jacob did so, and he completed the week of this one, and he gave his daughter Rachel to him as a wife. And Laban gave his daughter Rachel his maidservant Bilhah for a maidservant. And he came also to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked with him yet another 7 years. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated, so he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben. For she said, "Because the Lord has seen my affliction, for now my husband will love me." And she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, "Since the Lord has heard that I am hated, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he named him Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, "This time I will thank the Lord." Therefore she named him Judah. And then she stopped bearing. Chapter 30, verse 1. And Rachel saw that she had not borne any children to Jacob, and Rachel envied her sister. And she said to Jacob, "Give me children, and if not, I am dead." And Jacob became angry with Rachel, and he said, "Am I instead of God, who has withheld you the fruit of the womb?" So she said, "Here is my maidservant Bilhah. Come to her, and she will bear children on my knees, so that I too will be built up from her." So she gave him her maidservant Bilhah for a wife, and Jacob came to her. And Bilhah conceived, and she bore Jacob a son. And Rachel said, "God has judged me, and he has also hearkened to my voice, and has given me a son." So she named him Dan. And Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, conceived again, and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, "With divine bonds I have been joined to my sister. I have also prevailed." So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing children, she took her maidservant Zilpah, and gave her to Jacob for a wife. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, "Luck has come." So she named him Gad. And Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Because of my good fortune, for women have declared me fortunate," so she named him Asher. Thus concludes the third portion. So there's a lot that goes on with this one, but the first part we'll go over is the old switcheroo. So basically, as agreed, he worked 7 years to get Rachel as a wife, and on the night of the wedding, he got duped. Instead of Rachel being the one provided to his tent, it was actually Rachel's older sister, Leah. And so what happened was Laban explained that because of their customs, they could not let Rachel get married before Leah. So what they ultimately agree on is that you're going to work another 7 years and you're going to get both of my daughters. So first he gets Leah, then the week goes by, the marital time together, and then he gets Rachel. And then he also has to stay for another 7 years for more work. So he gets his wife before having to do the job this time. He gets both. But he has to still stay and work. So there are a lot of reasons this could have been done. Ultimately, we do hear the idea that, well, my daughters can't be married out of order, but there's also the more pressing matter of this guy is working for him, and he now knows that if he does this, he's going to have more work coming from this guy. So Laban doing this, it could be customary, or it could be that he really was just trying to scam Jacob into having to work another 7 years when he only was here to work the initial 7. So in any case, he gets both women, and they start becoming very competitive. Leah understands that she is not very well liked. One, because the circumstances of their marriage was entirely fraudulent. As far as she's aware and he's aware, this only happened because the father pulled a switcheroo. So she's not even really all that much liked. Otherwise, he would have asked for her to begin with. And so who is the one that comes to her aid? No one but the Lord above. Knowing that she is not appreciated, knowing that she is, as it says, hated, in order to make her more favorable in her husband's eyes, she is very, very, very fruitful. She has several children, each of them named for the ongoing reward or gift and mercy of the Lord, while Rachel, on the other hand, is not having children. So Leah, even though she's the lesser liked of the two wives, it turns out, success, she's going to be having all the children. Now, this eventually leads to a bit of a problem because she's over there now celebrating, ha 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 ha, I'm the one that he's going to like now because I'm the one giving him heirs and you're not, so I've secured my place here. And this is not terribly different from what happens with the relationship between Sarai and Hagar, where in that case, we actually see the same process of the maidservants being given over as well. But just sort of the emotional journey that is when someone is giving the man children and someone isn't, that person is ultimately going to have a lot of favor from the man in these times, in these relationships. So in any case, Rachel, knowing that she herself is failing to have children, she goes ahead and hands over her maidservant to be a wife so that she can give him children and thus build up her house, the house of Rachel, from her maidservant. Now, interestingly, one of the problems here is that she's not successful in having any children. She's envious of her sister, and she says to Jacob, her husband, "Give me children, and if not, I am dead." In other words, like, I'm worthless, my life is over. But Jacob, very rightfully, he keeps mindful of where all these blessings are supposed to come from. He became angry with Rachel and said, "Am I, instead of God, who has withheld you?" So, in other words, her mindset has been all wrong from the beginning. Leah has been receiving favor from God. Rachel is not accepting that it comes from God. She's blaming her husband and looking at her husband saying, "Husband, give me this," not understanding that it's not her husband that's going to give her this. It's going to be God above. And so he basically tells her what for. Hey, no. Is it me or is it him? So with that in mind, she gives over her maidservant, and sure enough, it happens. In any case, mission accomplished, the child is born, and now, with divine bonds, I have been joined to my sister. I have also prevailed. So, also, God has judged me, and he has also hearkened to my voice and has given me a son. So, both of these statements, right, I said them in reverse order. But essentially, now she is putting acknowledgement of where it is necessary, where it belongs, to the Lord above. And she's also, except I understand now, I've been judged. He hearkened to my voice, giving me a son. And also, now things have lined up, and she's making remarks. It's still a competition, isn't it? With divine bonds, I have been joined to my sister. I have also prevailed. Success. But now, Leah, because she understands that this is constantly a state of competition and doesn't want to be outdone and sees that she herself is no longer having children, she doesn't want to be left behind, so she takes her maidservant and does the same thing. And sure enough, she has a child as well. Leah said, luck has come. So with that, she has another one. Because of my good fortune, for women have declared me fortunate. So it's an acknowledgement that the people around her, even though she's not the one that Jacob likes, clearly the Lord has not forgotten her. And it's to such an extent that people who see their family call her fortunate. So in other words, even though she was hated, now in the eyes of others, she is seen as very fortunate. And I think that is a very significant thing to consider here. This competition was always about making one better than the other, and certainly there's not a whole lot of love, it feels like, for Leah. And so when she sees her sister gives up her maidservant, well, she can't let that go undone. She can't leave that tit for tat, so she puts up her own maidservant, who has not one but two sons. So she still continues to outdo Rachel in these ways. And again, that's the will of Hashem. That's the will of the Lord. So that's just how it's meant to be, and she never once questions or fails to acknowledge where these gifts come from, which is above. Moving on to the fourth portion. Genesis chapter 30, verse 14. Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest, and he found dudaim in the field and brought them to Leah, his mother. And Rachel said to Leah, now give me some of your son's dudaim. And she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken my husband, that you wish also to take my son's dudaim? So Rachel said, therefore he shall sleep with you tonight as payment for your son's dudaim. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, and Leah came forth toward him, and she said, you shall come to me, because I have hired you with my son's dudaim. And he slept with her on that night. And God hearkened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, God has given me my reward, for I have given my maidservant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has given me a good portion. This time my husband will live with me, for I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. And afterwards she bore a daughter, and she named her Dinah. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and he opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and she said, God has taken away my reproach. So she named him Joseph, saying, may the Lord grant me yet another son. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, send me away, and I will go to my place and to my land. Give me my wives and my children for whom I worked for you, and I will go, for you know my work which I have worked for you. And Laban said to him, if only I have now found favor in your eyes. I have divined, and the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So, once again, let's go to the top here at the end of the fourth portion. Let's roll it back. So, all these children are being born. Now, Reuben's old enough to go out into the field and do some work. He brings back something, and he gives it to his mother, and Rachel, and she's basically saying, hey, let me have some of that. And Leah says, oh, it's bad enough you take my husband, right? Because now Rachel has managed to get Jacob's attention again because of the child. Even though she's had so many kids, Leah's had so many kids, and even her maidservant had kids, Rachel is still the favorite. And of course, Leah was still the first wife based on the marriage order. But she says, is it not enough? Is it a small matter that you have taken my husband, that you wish also to take my son's dudaim? So Rachel basically says, fine, you know what? I'll give you an exchange. He'll sleep with you tonight. All right? You give me some of that and you can have him. So sure enough, she makes good on that deal. And the Lord favors her once again with another child. And continuing to what is the real reason? She continues to what is the reason she's doing this? She says, God has given me a good portion. This time, my husband will live with me, for I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. So the significance here, all of this is because she just wants to keep her husband. She just wants him to love her, to be with her. And now, with 6 sons, surely he will not look away from her. Surely now he will favor her and not continue to look at Rachel, because look at all the sons I've given you. I'm a wonderful wife. Come on. So, with that, she has a daughter. Now, after this, God has finally said, enough is enough, Rachel. It's time for you to have children too. So, Rachel, when she finally gets the blessing of having her fertility, she says, God has taken away my reproach. So she has this conviction of faith. She understands what was going on, and she acknowledges it is the Lord who made this possible. And so she even asks for a second one to come. So after this, now Jacob's planning to make his move. He's going to return to his homeland where he came from, and he wants to take his whole family with him. And he's asking Laban for the blessing. He says, hey, send me out of here, man. Send me here with your blessing. Let's do this thing. And he says, I've done the work. I've earned it. Let me go. And let me take my family. And Laban says, if only I have now found favor in your eyes. I have divined, and the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So in other words, he's basically saying, buddy, nephew, if only I have now found favor in your eyes, meaning, don't go leaving me behind. Plus, I see, I have a vision. I understand that I've been blessed for your sake. So, it's time to go. Let's move on to the 5th portion. Chapter 30, verse 28. Then he said, specify your wages for me, and I will give them. And he said to him, you know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock was with me. For the little that you had before me has increased in multitude, and the Lord blessed you upon my arrival. But now, when will I, too, provide something for my household? And he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall give me nothing. If you do this thing for me, I will return. I will pasture your flocks, and I will watch them. I will pass throughout all your flocks today, removing from there every speckled and spotted kid, and every brown lamb among the sheep, and every spotted and speckled one from among the goats, and this shall be my wages. And my righteousness will testify for me at a future date, for it will come upon my wages before you. Whatever is not speckled or spotted among the goats, or brown among the sheep, shall be counted as stolen with me. And Laban said, very well, if only it would be as you say. And he removed on that day the ringed and spotted male goats, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, whichever had white on it, and all the brown from among the sheep, and he gave them into the hands of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob tended Laban's remaining animals. And Jacob took himself moist rods of trembling poplar and hazelnut, and chestnut, and he peeled white streaks upon them, bearing the white that was on the rods. And he thrust the rods that he had peeled into the gutters in the watering troughs where the animals would come to drink, opposite the other animals, and they would come into heat when they came to drink. And the flocks came into heat by the rods, and the animals bore ringed, spotted, and striped young. And Jacob separated the sheep, and he turned the faces of the animals toward the ringed ones, and every brown one among Laban's animals. And he made himself flocks by himself, and he did not place them with Laban's animals. And it came to pass that whenever the animals were bearing their first would come into heat, Jacob would place the rods in the troughs, before the eyes of the animals, in order to bring them into heat by the means of the rods. But if the animals would delay, he would not place them, so that the ones that delayed were Laban's, and the ones that bore their first became Jacob's. And the man became exceedingly wealthy, and he had prolific animals and maidservants and manservants and camels and donkeys. Chapter 31. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken all that belonged to our father, and from what belonged to our father he has amassed this entire fortune. And Jacob saw Laban's countenance, that he was not disposed toward him as he had been yesterday and the day before. And the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your forefathers and to your birthplace, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flocks. And he said to them, I see your father's countenance, that he is not disposed toward me as he was yesterday, and the day before. But the God of my father was with me. And you know that with all my might I served your father. But your father mocked me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not permit him to harm me. If he would say thus, Speckled ones shall be your wages, all the animals would bear speckled ones. And if he would say thus, Ringed ones shall be your wages, all the animals would bear ringed ones. Thus God separated your father's livestock and gave it to me. And it came to pass at the time the animals came into heat, that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the he-goats that mounted the animals were ringed, speckled, and striped. And an angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Now lift your eyes and see that all the goats mounting the animals are ringed, speckled, and striped, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a monument, where you pronounced to me a vow. Now arise, go forth from this land, and return to the land of your birth. And Rachel and Leah replied and said to him, Do we still have a share or an inheritance in our father's house? Are we not considered by him as strangers, for he sold us and also consumed our money? But all the wealth that God separated from our fathers is now ours and our children's. So now all that God said to you, do. So there's a lot going on here, as usual. So let's break this down. So starting with the chapter 30, verse 29, he tells him outright, tell me what the wages will be. And Laban's a very, very clever man. He's a greedy man, by the way this is told. He basically says, here's how it'll be. Jacob, we have an agreement here. You're going to tend to my flock. Okay. And of that flock, any of them that have the following physical characteristics, whether they're speckled or spotted or they have rings on them, those will be yours. And the ones that don't have those blemishes will be mine. And then what he does is, before Jacob can get to work, Laban takes all of those animals that have those sorts of features and he removes them from the flock. So he basically has his sons take all of the ones that would have been Jacob's if they had procreated. They would have had, similar looking children, right? So he says to him, you get the ones that are born with spots on them. And then what does he do? He takes all the ones that would conceivably bear spots and removes them from Jacob's list of animals so that they won't have spots. In other words, he's going to make Jacob work, expecting that he's going to do all the work, and all the animals are going to be born looking without those features, and thus Laban will keep them, and Jacob will get nothing. So that's his scam. That's what he's planning. He's trying to scam Jacob here. This is all a big scheme. He thinks this is going to work out for him, but as it turns out, that's not how it goes. So he does all this, right? As it says, he removed on that day the ringed and the spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, whichever had white on it, and all the brown from among the sheep, and he gave them into his hands of his son. So he gives the ones that would turn into Jacob's profit, the ones that would benefit Jacob, he gives them to his sons to prevent Jacob from benefiting. Then he sets 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, and then Jacob tends to the remaining animals, which conceivably you would not expect to have these conditions. But Jacob, he does a very specific method to get the animals in heat, and because he's a very experienced shepherd, he's not only been working here, but he also worked back home, whereas his brother was a hunter, he was more of a house type of person, a farmer, one might suggest. This is more his background, and he's also the son of Isaac. And if we think about it, as we hear what happens here, after he does this whole entire methodology of getting the animals to start mating, this is the same success that happened to Isaac. When Isaac was wandering in those years before he settled down and passed on his blessing, he would go into places and he would be very, very successful. He would have huge success, and this would cause people to grow bitter and jealous. And sure enough, just like Laban is planning on swindling Jacob out of any successful flock here, what happens? Well, as it turns out, the Lord says, you could try all you want, but I'm not going to let you pull one over on my man. So even though it's not likely, turns out these animals are going to be mostly born, if not all born, to look like the ones that guarantee they belong to Jacob and not to Laban. So Laban basically, as it says here later on, he mentions he changes his wages 10 times. So in other words, things like this kept happening, and he'd say, okay, fine, well, instead of you taking the spotted ones, now you take the ringed ones. And so then he removes all the ringed ones, but then they start having rings. Okay, fine, well, instead of the ringed ones this time, you can only keep the spotted ones. So he takes out the ones with the rings, and then sure enough, the next brood is all spotted. So even though he keeps trying to pull one over on Jacob, it just doesn't work. And what happens is, as he continues to work and work and work and work, he's growing extremely successful. And Laban is not, because he wasn't dealing fairly with him to begin with. If he was smart, what Laban should have said was, we split it 50-50. Whatever animals we have, I get half, you get half. And that would have been a guarantee, because if we're both equally successful, if he says, I get half of what you do, Well, that would have been 50% of a ton. But instead, he says, I get the ones that are this condition or that condition. Well, God made it so that those ones didn't appear anymore, and Jacob kept benefiting because Laban made him a terrible contract, but it worked out to Jacob's benefit because of the divine hand stepping in. So, and it says specifically, one, that the sons are saying Jacob has taken all that belonged to our, chapter 31, Jacob has taken all that belonged to our father, and from what belonged to our father, he has amassed his entire fortune. So they're envious of that. They're like, man, can you believe that? This was our dad's stuff, and he's the one benefiting. Disgusting. And then he also notices that Laban, his uncle, used to be really friendly and really, oh, hey, nephew, how you doing? And now he can just tell his uncle doesn't really like him anymore. He's really starting, he can feel the resentment. His disposition has changed. He's not disposed toward me as he had been yesterday and the day before. So you could see that now his uncle just doesn't really like him anymore. And so the Lord tells him to go, and he doesn't hesitate. The God who he spoke to at Bethel, he says, it's me, I'm here, and I'm telling you it's time to go home. Get on out of here. And he also explains to his wives why they need to go, because he tells his two wives, Rachel and Leah, listen, we need to leave. Here's why. This happened with your father, and everything worked out, but also I heard from the Lord, he told me what to do. And also with all the things that happened, you know, your father would tell me this, and then he would try to pull fast on me, but in my dreams, I would see that the Lord was basically making sure that everything worked out anyway. So, long story short, it's time for us to go. And the two wives, they look at each other, look at him, they're like, do we still have a share in an inheritance in our father's house? Are we not considered by him strangers? For he sold us and also consumed our money? So basically what they're saying is, yeah, okay, let's go. He may be our father, but we're not part of his household anymore. He sold us to you, okay? So don't even worry about that. Let's just go. We get nothing from him. We get nothing of his inheritance, but instead all the things that you have, all that wealth that was taken and set aside by the Lord for you is ours and our children's. So now, if the Lord who has given us all this tells you it's time to go, it's time to go. Let's go. Thus concludes my very winded explanation of the fifth portion. Let's move on to the sixth. Chapter 31, verse 17. So Jacob rose, and he lifted up his sons and his wives upon the camels. And he held all his livestock and all his possessions that he had acquired, the purchase of his acquisition, which he had acquired in Padan Aram, to come to Isaac his father, to the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and meanwhile Rachel stole her father's teraphim. And Jacob concealed from Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing. So he and all that were his fled, and he arose and crossed the river. And he directed his face toward Mount Gilead. On the third day Laban was informed that Jacob had fled. So he took his kinsman with him, and he pursued him 7 days' journey, and he overtook him at Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream of the night, and he said to him, Beware, lest you speak with Jacob either good or evil. And Laban overtook Jacob, and Jacob pitched his tent on the mountain. And Laban pitched with his kinsmen on Mount Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done that you concealed from me, and led away my daughters like prisoners of war? Why have you fled secretly, and concealed from me, and not told me? I would have sent you away with joy and with songs, and with drum and with harp. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. Now you have acted foolishly. I have the power to inflict harm upon you. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Beware of speaking with Jacob either good or bad. But now you have gone away, for you longed for your father's house. But why have you stolen my goods? And Jacob replied, and he said to Laban, Because I was afraid. Because I said, Lest you steal your daughters from me. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our brothers, recognize for yourself what is with me, and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban entered Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and the tents of the 2 handmaids, but he did not find them. And he had come out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. But Rachel had taken the teraphim and placed them into the camel saddle and sat upon them. So Laban felt about the entire tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, Let my lord not be annoyed, for I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So he searched, but did not find the teraphim. And Jacob was annoyed, and he quarreled with Laban. And he said to Laban, "What is my transgression? What is my sin that you have pursued me? For you have felt about all my things. What have you found of all the utensils of your house? Put it here in the presence of my kinsmen and your kinsmen, and let them decide between the two of us. Already 20 years have I been with you, and your ewes and she-goats have not aborted, neither have I eaten the rams of your flocks. I have not brought home to you anything torn by other animals. I would suffer its loss. From my hand you would demand it, what was stolen by day and what was stolen at night. I was in the field by day, and when the heat consumed me, and the frost at night, and my sleep wandered from my eyes. This is 20 years that I have spent in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your animals, and you changed my wages 10 times. Had not the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac been for me, you would now have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the toil of my hands, and he reproved you last night." And so, here we have the big confrontation. So Jacob flees, he takes his family with him, and they go basically in the dead of night sort of deal. They don't even let Laban know they're leaving. Rachel steals her father's teraphim. Now this is essentially like she stole the idols. Laban was an idol worshiper, she just took the idol with her. So they flee. Laban finds out about it. He gathers up all his boys, and they come and running for him, and him and his kinsmen overtake Jacob at Mount Gilead, and they're about to have a confrontation. Before they can have that confrontation, Laban has a dream. The dream features none other than the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And basically, God warns him, don't you do it. Don't you do it. If you want to mess with him, you better think twice about that. Beware of speaking with Jacob either good or bad. Now, interestingly, the specific quote is in the English in the dream, beware lest you speak with Jacob either good or evil. And then when Laban tells the same story again, beware of speaking with Jacob either good or bad. And because I was very curious about this, I did also just quickly look at the Hebrew, and it looks to be the same words in Hebrew. In the first statement in the dream, Im Yaakov mitov adra, and then when Laban is telling him what he heard, midaber im Yaakov mitov adra. So it's the same thing in both sentences. It's just that the translation said good or bad one time and good or evil the other time. Let's go ahead and switch back over. So he basically just tells Jacob, your God spoke to me in the middle of the night, and he told me to watch myself. I could kill you if I wanted. I could do all these things. He's basically telling him, like, ooh, if it wasn't for your God, I have all the power right now. I could if I wanted to. I absolutely could. I have the power. But your God told me to watch myself. So instead, he transitions it to being a guilt thing. And he tries to make it so that Jacob's guilty. So he says, well, why'd you do this to me? And Jacob says, because I was afraid, because I said, lest you steal your daughters from me. And so he makes a very important and tragic statement here. He says, the one with whom you find your gods shall not live. So he doesn't understand that he's done this because he doesn't know that Rachel has the item. But basically, he just signed her death sentence. He just gave Rachel a death warrant, not knowing that she is the thief and that his things are here. So in the presence of not just the two of them, but also before the Lord, because he stepped in on this matter, he says, the one with whom you find your gods shall not live. That's Rachel. Even though Laban isn't able to find the teraphim, it doesn't matter. Rachel's done for. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So he goes and he searches and he searches and he searches, but he can't find his goods, and it's because Rachel put them inside of the camel bags. And when he goes to explore and search there, when he gets to Rachel, Rachel says, I can't get up. Let my lord not be annoyed, for I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me. So basically she says, I'm having my period. I can't get up in front of you. It's, for spiritual reasons. So he searches, but he doesn't search thoroughly. and he doesn't find what he's looking for. So now that he's searched and not found anything, Jacob is rightfully angry. He's pissed off. He says, What's my transgression? What's my sin that you have pursued me? And he just lectures him. He absolutely lectures him. He's like, for all these things, you searched, you didn't find anything. 20 years I gave you my life. 20 years I did everything. And I didn't ever take advantage of you once. If it was something that I did wrong, if an animal destroyed one of your flock, I paid for it. I replaced it. And all these things I've done, you changed my wages 10 times. I worked for 20 years to have what I have. And if it wasn't for God, I'm just going to tell you right now, I already know what kind of man you are. If it wasn't for God, you would have shown up and you would have ransacked me of all the things I have. You would have basically robbed me. If my God didn't just step in, you would have come and taken everything I have. So don't even try to act like a victim. Don't even try to act like you're not here because you're not a scumbag. All right? Let's be real. My God saw what you were doing and he reproved you last night. So in other words, know your place, dude, and don't even try to mess with me. You're wrong, and you're so wrong that my God told you you're wrong. So don't even try to act like you're such a nice benefactor. You're not, and I know you're not, and God knows you're not. Now back off. And now we move into the seventh and final portion for this week, chapter 31, Genesis, verse 43. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, and the sons are my sons, and the animals are my animals, and all that you see is mine. Now what would I do to these daughters of mine today, or to their children whom they have borne? So now, come, let us form a covenant, you and I, and may he be a witness between me and you. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones, and they took stones and made a pile, and they ate there by the pile. And Laban called it Yagar Sahaduta, but Jacob called it Gal-ed. And Laban said, this pile is a witness between me and you today. Therefore he called it Gal-ed. And Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord look between me and you when we are hidden from each other. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters when no one is with us, behold, God is a witness between me and you. And Laban said to Jacob, behold this pile, and behold this monument which I have cast between me and you. This pile is a witness, and this monument is a witness, that I will not pass this pile to go to you, and that you shall not pass this pile and this monument to come to me to do harm. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor judge between us, the God of their father. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob slaughtered a slaughtering on the mountain. And he invited his friends to eat a meal, and they ate bread and lodged on the mountain. Chapter 32. And Laban arose early in the morning, and kissed his sons and daughters, and blessed them. And Laban went and returned to his place. And Jacob went on his way, and angels of God met him. And Jacob said when he saw them, this is the camp of God. And he named the place Mahanaim. Thus concludes this week's Torah portion, concluding with a summary explanation of the seventh portion here. So he has now transitioned here to, okay, we're not even going to argue that fact. Like Laban's like, okay, I'm not even going to argue about it. But let's put it this way. These daughters are my daughters, the sons are my sons, the animals are my animals. All that you see is mine. This is all mine. What would I do to these daughters of mine today, or to their children whom they have borne? What would I do? Are you implying that I would do anything to hurt them? Come on. So now let's form a covenant. You and I, may he be a witness. So basically he's saying, I would never do anything to these people. They're my kin. I would never hurt any of them. These are my daughters. These are my grandsons. I'm not going to hurt them. But let's form a covenant. And they basically form their covenant, and I don't know the translation, so maybe next year I can provide a little bit more context on the names of the places, because Laban called it one thing, but Jacob called it another thing. And so essentially they make a covenant to say, there are two parts to this. First up, Laban has extra terms to his side. He says, if you afflict my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters when no one is with us, behold, God is a witness between me and you. So essentially what he's saying is, don't go around behind my daughters' backs. Don't take another wife. These are the people that you're going to be with. All right? So you're sticking with this family. And before God, you're going to even acknowledge that. And the other thing he also says is, we're going to define the border here. You stay on your side, I'll stay on my side, and I'm not going to pursue you. You don't come to me to do harm, all right? So that's our agreement. I'm not going to go over there to you, and you're not going to come over here to do harm. So, in basically keeping it simple like that, we're leaving it as that. This is from this day forward, we're dividing and going our separate ways. We're going to make a covenant over it, and now we can keep that binding so that we're both secure. And again, this happens with a lot of the people that encounter the patriarchs. They always want to form covenants with them, right? They realize that they are walking with the Most High God, who actually always steps in when they are needed. So, what do? Okay, let's form a covenant with that guy, because obviously he's got something that we want to have access to, and we want to basically tie his hands to stop him from hurting us. So let's make a covenant. So he makes this covenant. The deal is set. Everything goes well. And Jacob swears by it as well. They swear on their fathers, etc., to the gods of their fathers. And after having a sacrifice and a meal, they part ways in the next chapter. Laban goes home after he kisses his sons and daughters. So basically, now that the conflict is settled, the thing he says, you left before I could even kiss them goodbye. Now he gets to kiss them goodbye, and he also blesses them. And I think that's really important too. Laban is not a good guy a lot of the time. He's often portrayed as being a very bad guy. And obviously what happens when he tries to swindle people, that obviously is the biggest reason he's considered a bad guy, and greedy, and things like that. But even so, he still wanted to bless and say goodbye to his family. So he's not all bad. But he not only leaves them with kisses, but he also blesses them. It's worth something, at least. I certainly think so. And then he goes home. And then Jacob goes his way, and the angels of God met him. And when he saw them, he says, this is the camp of God. So this is just, again, he realizes like heading where he's heading. This is a really spiritual place, the camp of God. Like we are in the presence of God's servants. We're in the presence of angels. This is quite a thing, quite an experience. So this is just to sort of continue to acknowledge the significance of these places on his journey, especially when they have these covenants and things formed. It shows that it's happening in the presence of very, very elevated beings and those who serve the Most High. So in any case, that concludes this week's Torah portion in full for all of Vayeitzei. And out of curiosity, just what does Vayeitzei mean? Well, the word Vayeitzei means, and he left. So this is talking all about from when he leaves his hometown to go and meet his uncle, and then also at the end, he leaves again, right? So that's the meaning of the name Vayeitzei, and he left. He also leaves again when he goes back home. So I think thematically it ties together very nicely, and we have our explanation for the name of this Torah portion, covering Genesis 28:10 to 32:3. And that's all we got for this week, so thank you so much for tuning in. I suppose the conclusion I can leave you with is when you're making any kind of a deal with somebody, especially for labor and things like that, always be mindful, and also understand that even family can sometimes really not be there for you, and people who are your kinsmen could still pull a fast one on you. So really, at the end of the day, who can you have faith in but the Lord to look out for you, protect you, take care of you? This seems to be a recurring theme across these different portions. And I also think, we look at this in relation to the previous portion, when he takes his brother's blessing, right? When he swindles his brother's blessing out of his father, right, when he manages to pull a fast one and get the blessing that was intended for Esau, but he takes it for himself, Jacob's concerned about being cursed, and his mother says, no, the curse is on me. But as we can see here, Jacob yes, he benefited, yes, things went well, but, we could see a little bit of a karmic justice here. Even though he is blessed and chosen by the Lord, he also can handle some affliction. And, he worked very hard for Laban. He talks about that. I worked in the heat of the sun. I was cold in the frost of the night, and I was exhausted. And I did all this. So all his emphatic claims about what he did, that's hard work. And I think it speaks to the punishment for what he did wrong. Because compare it to when Isaac's wife is picked up, it's like a done deal instantly. Boom, boom. But in this case, instead, he has to actually really work hard. So there was a consequence for how he ended up taking the birthright from his brother and the blessing. And we can see that the Lord has seen to it that he is still successful, but it did not come without its share of toil and turmoil, because you can't do the wrong thing to people. You just can't. It's not right. And it doesn't matter. Even if you're the Lord's chosen, that doesn't mean you're immune. So always keep that in mind when you are doing something and are considering having misconduct. Do your best to focus on proper conduct. Otherwise, you might get stuck in a deal for another 7 years. In any case, this has been Shmuel Moshe. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope to see you next time. As always, we hope to continue every single week. And if you enjoyed the show, please let me know your interpretations and what your thoughts were on the overall experience. I'd love to hear your feedback and commentary. Until next time, thank you for tuning in to the Weekly Parashahcast. This has been Shmuel Moshe. Baruch Hashem.